Hello and welcome to Phenomenology Club. I am Buttress and this is my club. First of all, solidarity to all of you who are standing in protest. What you are doing is taking a great risk on your own personal health and well-being, and you are doing a good thing. And I hope that you remain energized through all of this bullshit going on right now. I don't know how useful anything I have to say will be, but I feel like any of us who feel that we can be making contributions at this moment in time should be trying our best to do that. Try to be useful to this cause that we're finding ourselves embroiled in, a cause that, has been being fought for decades and decades and is culminating right now in this moment. So wherever you are, I hope you're being safe. I feel like the most important thing that any of us can be doing is really trying our best to educate ourselves on all matters of law and political histories, especially because these are the tools that we need right now if we want to be able to strategize towards goals and future outcomes. We need to be thinking about what exactly the problem is and how best to confront it. What can we actually do? And clearly one of the things we can actually do is protest, be there as a physical body participating in these demonstrations. That is not disputable. But beyond this, we should all be invested in strategizing. Strategizing is the most important thing we can be doing because, some of these things that people are already starting to see as minor wins, things like the Camden police force crossing lines and expressing quote-unquote solidarity with the protesters. People are already starting to see these kinds of things as wins. These are not wins. This is far more than just an ideological battle or a battle that can be won by these sort of gestures that function as nothing more than acts of empty symbolism. We need to make structural change because racism is a structural problem, and all that allows for this authoritarian abuse of power exists by design. Our structures of government in the United States of Triple K America are designed this way. We need to understand exactly what the structural flaws in our system are if we want to make structural changes to them. Personally, something I've been doing is watching fucking US crash course in politics videos. I mean, it's embarrassing. I consider myself one of the most educated people I know, not to toot my own horn. It's just how I feel. And a lot of the most foundational knowledge about the structures of US government are things that I've completely forgotten since learning them in fucking, I don't even know what grade we learned about this shit. That's how little I remember. I remember spending 2 years on World War II history. I don't really remember getting a comprehensive education about how our actual legal structures work in the United States of Triple K America. So this is something we should all be doing. Shannon says, go Craig. Yes, Craig is the name of this host for this PBS series that we've actually been screening in Phenomenology Club, watching together and taking detailed notes and even quizzing each other. I mean, this has only been a few days we've been doing this, but if you'd like to participate in that, please come into our Phenomenology Club Discord server, because this is what we've been doing, because what we feel as a group is the way that we can be most helpful is to try to become as educated as possible. All U.S. citizens should really be concerned with becoming legal experts to the best of their abilities. Clark Kent says, you're watching the John Green vids? No, it's not John Green. It's someone named Craig. Shannon knows. I don't know who John Green is, but I'll check that out as well. Amelia says Crash Course is 11 out of 10. It is a really good series, but myself, I mean, the host talks really fast. Something that I found helped me is watching it at 75% speed. He talks incredibly fast. You need to watch at 75% speed and also take detailed notes. I mean, we should really, it sounds like homework because it is homework. You need to learn how this shit works. Most of the videos that we watched so far, I watched twice at 75% speed. So, simply watching is not enough either. You need to be actually internalizing the information that's being presented to you. Not just about this guy, there's all types of resources that we can be looking to if we want to get educated about the U.S. legal system and why it functions this way and what we can do to change it. We need to understand exactly what things like fucking Trump is doing right now. When he's trying to do things like potentially invoke the Insurrection Act and send military troops into various states, and how he would be able to do a thing like override states' permissions to enter into states with the military. And so gaining a foundational understanding of U.S. politics, I think, is something that is absolutely necessary, because right now we are already embroiled in a battle. I think that in some ways this first battle has almost been won, in the sense that most people in the United States of America, I would say, have an attitude of pessimism, myself included, about the possibility of a thing like violent uprising, period. It's always been discussed among people almost like some sort of a pipe dream, that because we see protests rise and fall, people stay energized for a few weeks, but never have we seen such an outpouring of support from such a diverse group of protesters in American history. I mean, this should all be a lesson to all of us that there is manpower to be harnessed towards a goal. It exists. And I think just this display itself is so powerful in that way, because people are starting to realize and become energized that maybe we can fight back, because it's crazy. I mean, who could have ever predicted this set of circumstances? I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, like I said, I am not as educated in U.S. political history as I should be, and I think that's partially due to the failures of our education system, a system that really benefits from us remaining ignorant about all of these things, our very own history. We just need to be complicit citizens and fucking walking dollar signs. That's how we function. But as far as I know, this is a historical moment. And so what we should be doing, if not protesting, is trying to become a legal expert as fast as you fucking can, because the next step in this battle that we're fighting is to actually articulate clear goals and make clear demands. It won't be sufficient to get cops to symbolically say, oh, we agree, the police force is we need to end police brutality, we agree with you, we see you guys. Like, that's not enough. That is unacceptable at this point. That possibility, I mean, it's too little too late. Cops shouldn't take it shouldn't take this much effort for cops to see that there is such a problem that exists on this scale, and that is their reasoning for now pretending to care about citizens, or to fucking kneel, says Barbie. Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw that video, but I saw some video where, they were trying to get the cops to kneel, and a few cops took a knee, and then there was video, someone was like eavesdropping on these policemen that were talking about it, and you could even hear some of them were saying like, whatever gets them to stop. Like, I highly doubt that these shows of good faith are actually being made in good faith by the police. They are trying to get you to stop, and you shouldn't. So, I mean, on top of educating ourselves, we also need to try our best to educate other people, right? And share with other people what we think we have learned so that everybody can be educated to the best of their ability, you know. And I wanted to talk a little bit about violence because this is one of the narratives that I've been seeing emerge in all of these discussions, and one of the most often cited reasons for why people might be hesitant to throw support behind the protesters or something. And honestly, I don't completely understand this viewpoint. And maybe that's a shortcoming of my own, so I'm not entirely sure how to address it. I would personally hope that none of my listeners feel this way. But if you do, I mean, something that I think you should ask yourself, if you're one of these people that believes violence is not the answer or something, I mean, you have to ask yourself, I think, why you feel this way. What do you think violence is? I mean, I could get into some deep philosophical diatribe, and maybe I will, because fuck it, we're home and we're discussing this right now. But violence clearly is a thing that characterizes action, right? Violence is not an essential property of humans. And I feel like this is something that people genuinely believe, though. And this is one of the justifications for why people feel as if violence is a thing to be transcended and avoided. People speak as if the human condition is implicitly violent. We possess this characteristic of violence, and this is a thing that we should willfully negate within ourselves, you know. And this could not be further from the truth. We had an hours-long debate about this in Phenomenology Club, and I'll just summarize some of the main points for you maybe. I did an upload on here about violence once, but I don't think that I really did a great job at making any points. So when we talk about violence and what is violent, what exactly is this describing? Violence does not characterize people, really. It characterizes what people do, right? You can't be violent. You can only do violent things, you know? And doing violent things are not implicitly good or bad, right? Some of the most non-moral examples you can think of is to think of early humans, you know, if we're going to talk about essential properties of humanity and shit, you know. What Barbie says, I loved your past stream on violence. It opened my mind. I'm glad. I feel like a lot of what I say is just so stupid. I think that this is the problem with philosophy in general and mobilizing people to actually find it to be a useful thing to be invested in, is because a lot of what we say as philosophy and phenomenology enthusiasts sounds so matter-of-fact and almost obvious when you lay it out. But I think when you start to compare and contrast certain ideas you have to other ideas you have, you start to notice how many inconsistencies exist in your very own worldview. And this is one of the main utilities of philosophy on a personal level anyway, that you are able to cultivate a generally more healthy, coherent worldview for yourself, because even examining the most arbitrary seeming concepts really illuminate how you treat all concepts. And I think questions of violence and essentializing properties of humanity as, or essentializing any properties of humankind, using actions to try to characterize humans in general, you know, this is a thing, this is the same mechanism that underlies things like racist ideology, you know, to use what you think you observe about certain individuals behaving in this or that way to essentialize these properties and say that all X people are like this, all X people are like that, you know. And I think that thinking about violence is a really explicit example of this idea, you know, to think of a non-moral example, an early human being attacked by a bear, you know. A bear is acting to you in a way that is violent, and you respond in a way that is violent. Does that make you violent? This thing you did is violent. I mean, this thing you did is violent. But humans are not implicitly violent. And in that sense, violence is not a thing to be treated as something that inherently holds some sort of moral weight. It doesn't. And like someone in here has just said, violence is what caused there to be any action taken on what's happened recently. And that's absolutely true. People are not just going out to be violent right now. They are responding to violence. How do you respond to violence except with violence, And this is not something that should be treated necessarily as a moral issue. It becomes one in the context of our society that has morals and systems of ethics that we all adhere to, but it is not at baseline a moral issue. To compare it to the bear. A bear attacks you violently. How are you going to survive? To respond with violence. Long live good people. Shaolin monks are an example of spiritual violence. Are you talking about how they're drilling holes into their heads and shit? Because that shit is pretty crazy. But anyway, clearly, violence is a thing that characterizes action, and in that sense, it is strategic, We should not be avoiding violence for the sake of avoiding violence, and we should not be embracing violence for the sake of embracing violence. We should be using violence when it is the best strategy. And I would say that in the instance of these protests, this is the best strategy, What does it take for people to actually take this issue of police brutality and systemic racism seriously, where violence is just being enacted in such extreme ways on our black population, with such violence? How are they supposed to respond? How long can you just try to convince people to see things differently, convince the police to come over the protest lines and take a knee or whatever the fuck they're doing, You need to respond in a way where you can actually meet your goal. If the goal is to put an end to police brutality, the goal is to put an end to violence being enacted on our black populations, then it seems like the best strategy, first and foremost, is to respond in kind. The people need to make a show of force, Mary McCann, do you feel that speaking out and risking saying the wrong thing or causing others to see us as taking their voice away is better than not saying anything at all on the matter? To a certain extent, Mary, yeah. I mean, I definitely want to speak cautiously. When I say that, I think violence is an acceptable strategy, that is not me saying, like, clearly this is the only strategy. I don't believe that, I think that for anything that exists, any scenario, there are multiple strategic approaches you can take to reaching your end goal. If violence is one that is that is demonstrating to be working, then of course there's the what am I trying to say? Then of course you should pay merit to this, But I'm not suggesting that this is the only way, because as we're starting to confront the possibility of things like military troops being deployed to people on the street, I mean, how are the people going to fare against military troops, I don't think personally that we would win that battle, So maybe violence is not the best approach in that way, I definitely think that for anybody who is trying to strategize and think about the best things to do right now, they should be considering multiple viewpoints, We have such an attitude in the United States of Triple K America especially, that at all times there is only one verifiable solution, and this is the one that we should be gravitating towards. But this is not true for literally anything. So why would it be true for this, All that I think is definitely true is that violence can be a useful strategy, But anybody who listens to this series also knows that I have great criticisms of violence as the only strategy, and this attitude that violence is the thing that is always most effective. There is historical precedent for this. This is something that I personally disagree with, because I feel like most revolutions lead only are able to create some sort of temporary stasis until the next one. My personal belief is that the most effective thing you can be doing is strategizing, and this requires education, fucking thinking, because violence is not strategy in and of itself. It's a useful strategy, and I think that it's being demonstrated to be a useful strategy right now at this moment of time, but it's not the be-all to end all. It's not like this needs to end in some massive war or where there's simply a show of force and this is how we will succeed. I think violence will likely be an integral part of the strategy, but I don't think that it is the be-all to end all, that this must end in some massive battle. Maybe it will, though, but I think that at all times we should all be open to multiple possibilities and doing our best to give each one equal weight, because at the end of the day, what's most important is achieving a goal. So for one, we need to outline a goal, and this is part of why I was talking about in the last upload, this idea that we really need to understand the structures of racism and police brutality on a legal level, because this is how they are enacted. It's true that on an ideological level, people are racist. They have visceral hatred of their fellow man, and this needs to also be addressed. People need to try their best to fight this battle ideologically. But at the end of the day, it's all worth nothing if we don't actually make structural change, because this is a structural problem. And the structure of racism exists in our legal system. This is the thing that needs to be changed. So if violence is going to be a strategy in this movement towards changing the legal structures of America, then that's what will happen, But all of it will be worth nothing if we don't have a goal and we can't articulate that goal and how best to get there. For any goal, there's a million routes one could take. And my only point about violence, as far as being a moral issue, is that violence is not implicitly moral or immoral. It's a neutral variable, We talk about things like senseless violence, And the reason that we say senseless violence is immoral is because it's also senseless. Violence with no goal, violence with no direction, is ultimately a thing that should be avoided. Even if you were to remove some sort of, all the moral arguments from it, Senseless violence is a thing you should avoid, even if for purely selfish reasons, that you don't want violence enacted back on your body, And we see that police are committing senseless violence towards our black citizenry, and this is why people are responding in kind, but not with senseless violence, I mean, why do all world societies tend to feel as if murder in self-defense is acceptable? Because the people who murder in self-defense did not initiate the action, If someone is trying to kill you, of course it is your right to respond in kind. Tobias said, I mean, that's how some people are thinking. What do you mean by that? Mary, when you said, when you're talking about taking voices away from other people, I think that this is something that is really interesting to think about right now, I don't think that people should feel, if you feel you have something to contribute, then I would say, I feel you should make that contribution. And if somebody tells you that that contribution is erroneous, be open to that information at all. We should all be open fucking sponges right now. You should open your mind to infinite possibilities as far as anything goes. But something that I think is also a big problem, and why this will be a really difficult task, coming up with strategies, is because one of the things that I think is severely lacking in more progressive movements in the left is leadership, We need organization, and we need to rally around leaders. I feel like this is something that is just completely lacking for many reasons, you know. And that's one of the most difficult things, I think, here. Because how can we organize towards any goal if we have no leaders? Leaders don't have to be people that really stand out among the rest of us in any real way, except they are someone to rally around as a figurehead, because this helps get things done, you know. I think that the atmosphere right now in general, you know, we're always trying to tear down people as soon as they rise up or whatever. I think we need to let go of this attitude that leaders need to be morally perfect or something, because we also need to let go of this attitude that only a true leader will have the best strategy because they came up with it, you know. We're always looking to other people to be more educated than ourselves, to know better than us, and this is who we'll follow around. But if we all possessed equal insights and we were all equally educated, you know, then a thing like rallying around a leader wouldn't be something where we need to find someone who is the smartest, the wisest, the most morally pure, you know. It would simply be for practical purposes. The function of leaders is entirely practical, you know. So this is something we absolutely need to do. Sorry, I'm looking at some of these comments. Canada is just as racist. They just have prime minister that is less obvious about it. Yeah, I mean, I'm reading the comments, sorry. Mary McCann, this may be too deep of a topic, but does anyone have any insight on why America appears to have more ingrained systematic racism as opposed to other Western countries? Well, Mary, I don't think that's too deep of a question. The answer is, I think, pretty transparently because of our history of slavery. I mean, this is not some minor fucking event in American history, some sort of footnote. I mean, even as early as like 1776, 18% of the United States population was enslaved black Americans. Well, they weren't Americans at that time because they weren't citizens. Or don't quote me on that. I'm still not as educated on my legal histories as I wish to be. But I mean, that is a ginormous amount of the U.S. population, and that is right at the origins of the United States of America. A thing like this that is so structural. This is why we have such structural racism. I mean, I think people think of the concept structural to be more like this nebulous kind of thing where we're just trying to express that it's interwoven into the fabric of all interactions in America, but it's deeper than that, you know. The literal structure of America, of the Constitution, I mean, it's woven into these things too. It's not just woven into the fabric of daily interactions with other people. It's literally woven into our legal system, and it makes sense because as early as 1776 we have 18% of the population as slaves, and if I'm not mistaken, that's a higher percentage population than we currently have of black Americans. I believe now it's 12 or 13%, you know. It's insane. So of course this problem needs to be addressed at the fucking root. We need real legal changes. This ideological battle won't be won, you know. And it's not fair to black Americans that they have to deal with people who want to be allies and stuff, just paying endless lip service to this or that. I'm going to educate my fellow white people. I'm going to self-flagellate and this or that, you know, or burn it all down. I hate America. Fuck it here, you know, like, fuck your performative rage. Fucking do something. What you can do is become a fucking legal expert, understand how racism works at the most structural level, and try your best to rally support around what exactly needs to fucking happen, you know. Because you're never going to win this battle if you think that the issue is simply racism. If this issue is simply ideological racism. That the problem is just that black people are so dehumanized in the eyes of American society and treated as second-class citizens in even the most arbitrary daily exchanges, you know. This is also true, and this is part of how racism functions, but addressing this will be insufficient. Right. Angel says, well, recently here in Canada, in the city of Toronto, about an hour away from there, was a black woman who was pushed off a balcony by the Toronto police. Her name was Regis Korchinski. I saw that, Angel, and that's fucking terrible. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think any Western country is exempt from this because racism is global, you know. It's not just a problem in America. The reason America has some of the most explicit racial problems is simply because of our history of human slavery. Of course, this problem will persist. I mean, slavery wasn't abolished until 1860. There's no way that this issue can be resolved quickly, you know. This is going to be with us for a long time. And I think that part of what we're seeing now, you know, has a lot to do with the fact that all successes in this arena have been insufficient as far as really changing things, you know. America will slowly make concessions to the black population and hope that they go away and hope that they continue to suffer in silence, you know. But this isn't enough. We need to take out the problem at the fucking root. I think too that something people are really grappling with right now is, myself included, is an attitude of kind of pessimism, you know. It's hard to feel like we can be successful, and I think that part of the reason that is especially right now with Trump threatening to send the military into certain states and shit, we're starting to see just how much potential bloodshed, and not only bloodshed, but how insurmountable this task really seems, how arduous it's going to be to actually fight a thing like structural racism and police brutality, you know. I think that a lot of people feel defeated in the face of this, and it's hard not to, because I think what people are really starting to have to mentally confront, a thing that we all knew hypothetically, but really didn't ever witness to, and in that sense really didn't have any sort of experiential knowledge into this thing, we're all starting to confront just how difficult the things that we think we want are to achieve, you know. I mean, most people a few months ago could never even conceive of what we're experiencing right now, you know. Most people couldn't conceive of the fucking pandemic. And to speak of the pandemic, I mean, this, for myself, is sort of a variable too that makes me feel in some sense pessimistic, because I know that if it wasn't for this pandemic, if everybody was not staying home and feeling anxious and out of work and all of these things, I don't think that we would be experiencing what we're experiencing right now. And on some level, this knowledge translates into a feeling that resistance is kind of futile, you know, and that people are operating out of mixed motives, you know, that people don't really care. It's just that we're all stuck inside because of coronavirus. People want to get out of the house. People are feeling angry. People are feeling scared, you know. But I don't think that we should let these ideas turn us into pessimists on this issue. For one, the question of individuals' motives, I think ultimately is inconsequential, and this is something that I wish people, more progressive thinkers, embraced, you know, that there will never be a body of people with some completely identical motives among them, you know. People are always going to have mixed motives, and we already know that a lot of the protesters are fucking machismo types that just want to go fucking fight club on the street, which is a lot of people who call themselves Antifa or Proud Boys or whatever. There's definitely this faction of dudes that basically treat protests like they're at some fucking hardcore show and just want to go fucking throw down on the streets because it makes them feel excited and gets the testosterone fucking flowing, you know. There's going to be people who are also just trying to loot and do whatever, and they're using the protests as an opportunity for this, you know. But at the same time, I think that we need to let go of this idea that your motives are ultimately the thing that will make or break the effort, you know. Who cares if there's going to be a bunch of assholes that are doing things for this or that selfish reason, you know. Fuck them, obviously. They have a worldview that we disapprove of. At the same time, if they're out there doing something, that energy can be harnessed into a more productive goal, you know. Use them. It's don't let that energy go to waste. And this is how I feel also about leadership, you know. I think that there'll be certain leaders with motives that might not be totally trustworthy, or who you don't feel are really the best people or individuals. But if they're able to mobilize some support towards a goal you agree with, you know, then fucking use them. Use whatever is available to you. Oh, Debbie Friday, hey. I was watching the footage from the uprisings, and police forces literally look like military personnel. We are seeing something that has been in the making for decades. It is shocking and sick. Debbie Friday, you're the musician, right? Assuming you're who I think you are, you rule. Thank you for being here. I hope you're safe. And I'm sorry that you're going through this. Yeah, dude. It's definitely scary. And in just trying to learn more about our legal system and how it all works, you know, it's really interesting because even now I don't feel like I have a comprehensive view of everything going on. But as far as what is legal, yes, okay, it is you. Great. Everyone go watch Debbie Friday's videos and listen to her music. It's awesome. Fuck, what was I saying? Oh yeah, like the National Guard, okay? I did not know that the National Guard is both a state and a federal entity. I mean, I sort of understood that they are a faction of the military, but I didn't understand, and I still don't fully understand exactly when they are agents of the state and when they are agents of the federal government, you know. I'm trying to understand the legality of everything going on. What it seems to me, and my most preliminary understanding of how the U.S. government works is, what it seems to me like Trump specifically is trying to do is to find some sort of legal loophole, quote unquote, which makes sense when you observe his character, for being able to send in the military to states, for one, because it's a show of power and authority, something that he is clearly so hungry for and always has been. But also, you know, to try and look like he is being a leader in this time or whatever, you know. And the way that the Constitution is set up, I mean, we're all familiar with the system of checks and balances, quote unquote, you know. And even this is subject to criticism, the idea that they were really trying to create a truly democratic government where people had equal say and all this. I mean, this is not entirely true, but they did make genuine efforts, even in ways that exclude poor people, slaves. You know, they did make genuine efforts to try to create some sort of system where no branch of the government could become all too powerful, you know, because they're all looking out for themselves too. And so the executive branch that the president is the head of, he controls the military, and there are a lot of safeguards, quote unquote, written into the Constitution so that the president can't do a thing like he's threatening to do right now. Just send the military into all the states and fucking show his fucking authority or whatever, you know. And it seems like what he was trying to do at first is getting Antifa labeled a terrorist organization, because I believe this would be the legal loophole for him to do a thing like employ the fucking troops to the states. Because right now he does not possess the authority to do this. And each state has their own National Guard, which is a part of the U.S. military, but also a thing that functions or that answers to the authority of their respective states. But they also can be mobilized as a federal entity, and I'm not sure exactly what that underlying mechanism is. These are the things I'm trying to understand, kind of. But from what I understand, military troops can be deployed by the federal government if the states give them express permission to. And this thing has not happened yet, thankfully. It seems like most state governors do not want to allow for this. And so I think what Trump is trying to do is find ways to be able to deploy the troops to the states without their permission. And this is why people are talking about the Insurrection Act today, an act that comes from 1807, I believe. I think Thomas Jefferson created it, where the president can override this mechanism where the states are supposed to grant express permission if he wants to deploy the military to the respective states. They can override it if you can prove that there are federal crimes being committed. And this, too, is why I think we're seeing a lot of tweets from Trump and discussions about interstate travel, because the federal government controls certain interstate laws, and highways and shit. So I think that, and again, I'm not even close to a legal expert. I'm doing the fucking U.S. crash course in U.S. politics thing. Like, I'm a fucking idiot. Not just in politics. I'm just an idiot all over, but I'm doing what I can. I think that there's such an emphasis now on federal crimes because they're trying to find a justification for how they can send the military into states without the state's permissions, So if they can prove, this is what it seems like they're trying to do at first, to get Antifa labeled a terrorist organization. If they can prove that there's some terrorist organization at play, in the states, this would be a federal crime, and then the federal government would have the right to send in the military. And it seems like they're kind of abandoning this. It's such a complex issue too, because we have a fucking moron that's just like tweeting his stream of consciousness. And like Shannon said in Phenomenology Club earlier, he's literally Googling probably, how can I use the military against people? And he's probably watching, no, I wouldn't even give him that much credit, watching the U.S. crash course in politics videos himself. But it literally seems like he's trying to find a loophole to send in the military. And I think he probably acknowledged that he won't be successful in labeling Antifa a terrorist organization, because this would probably be ruled out as unconstitutional really quickly, because for one, they're not really an organization. They have no sort of leadership. And for two, much of what Antifa does is rally around First Amendment rights, So I think that realizing they would have no success this way, now what they're trying to do is prove that federal crimes are being committed. And this is why we're seeing so much people talking about what % of arrested protesters are coming from out of state, because I think they think if they can prove people are traveling across state lines to incite riots, to do this or that, then it would be a federal crime, and then they can swoop in with the fucking military, This is my anecdotal observations. Thanks for the super chat, Mary. Reading comments. William Fitzgerald. Police serve the local, state police cover the state and borders, National Guard, Coast Guards are for devastations and emergency, and the military is for protecting borders and foreign and domestic. Sean Ryan, you're right that more of us who want to make this systemic change and work for the rights of the marginalized communities need to learn more about how our politics work, especially community leaders. I know I don't know enough in that area either, and now I'm more inspired to. Yeah, it really is true. It's such a cliche, but you can't fight your enemy unless you understand them, it seems to me, and this is just anecdotal, but it seems to me that the general public has a very, very poor understanding of the U.S. legal system. And if this is true, then I think that we are not going to come up with the best strategies to actually tackle the problem. What kinds of things really needs to happen to change this? Something that I've been thinking about is how I feel like something that probably needs to happen is we need to get rid of all of these immunity type clauses and legal justifications for why police are able to do things like commit homicide against the population without having a homicide trial. And this also relates to things like murder and self-defense laws, stand your ground laws, which is the reason George Zimmerman got away with murder of Trayvon Martin. There's so many laws, and they're enacted at both the state and the federal levels that basically allow for state officials to get away with things like violent assault and murder. They're just written into our government at every tier of it. These are the things we need to be invested in weeding out. This also includes things like precedents established by Supreme Court cases. I was just reading today about how there is a precedent, I forget what the case was, but there's a precedent established by a certain case where police are basically granted immunity. I think it's called the, hold on, let me look it up. I think it might be called the immunity clause. No, that doesn't make sense. But basically, qualified immunity. Look into this. Look, I see an article just from 4 days ago. Police misconduct. Supreme Court may reconsider. Here, I'll post it in here. This qualified immunity. It's basically a precedent established by a Supreme Court case where police are able to get away with certain acts of violence, and the victim has no chance of standing up for themselves against them unless you can prove that the police violated a specific constitutional right. And one of the difficulties of our legal system in particular is this vagueness of language that permeates our legal structures at every fucking level. I mean, there is so much that I can't believe. It's honestly a wonder, the more you read into the Constitution and legislation at both the state and the federal level, it's honestly a wonder that we can function at all with all this vague fucking language. It's like, did the fucking forefathers expect that we were all fucking literature majors? Like, it's just ridiculous. This process of interpreting laws is you're basically, I mean, and I think that it's constructed this way by design. On the one hand, you could say that vague language, I think, is a beneficial thing in certain regards, but not when it comes to a lot of this shit. This shit is really, this is something we should all be invested in too. Thinking about how the vagueness of U.S. law is creating so much problems. We need to come up with much more rigorous speech for our laws. Like, they are just, it's so vague. So much of it is so vague. I mean, I was trying to read today about whether or not the military can refuse orders from the executive branch, or from the president rather. And of course the answer was basically like, it's really not, the language is too vague to say definitively. And this is part of why people like Trump, I mean, who are just these shady businessmen, he spent his whole life exploiting vagaries of language in our legal systems. He's always looking for some sort of loophole to get out of this or that. And if you pay the best lawyer who can make the best argument in this way and kind of exploit all of these loopholes in the legal system that exist because of things like vague language and inconsistencies, then, you'll find success. So this is something we should really be concerned with as well. Ending some of this incredibly vague language in the legislation. It's just ridiculous. Debbie Friday said, I'm not sure what you were responding to, but especially considering the role the media plays in all this, it is psychological warfare to confuse and frighten and weaken. Yeah, I mean, that's another variable we should definitely be preoccupied with. Making sure that we still remember that the media serves its own corporate interests, you know. Nothing is as it fucking appears. We need to be doubting everything. And it's like almost impossible to come to firm resolutions within ourselves, you know. I think that this is even more reason for why we should all feel like our number one responsibility, maybe even more than protesting, especially if we're having conflicts about what exactly we should and should not be doing and to what extent. We need to be equipping ourselves with the necessary toolkit by investigating political history, our legal structure, and also philosophy. This is something I think is really undervalued, because especially to talk about things like vague language, you know, what are the arguments made in our various court systems for justifying whether or not a law was executed properly? I mean, we have a whole branch of government, our judicial branch, whose job it is to interpret the law and declare whether or not it is constitutional, you know. How are they interpreting the law? When you read Supreme Court fucking cases, you know, the arguments and shit, they're doing philosophy. They're explaining why this language doesn't necessarily mean that, or it does mean that, but it's negated by this other clause. So basically, boom, you know, like, and it's a shame because the people that we task with interpreting the law, I think, don't really have comprehensive understandings of philosophy themselves, even though this is the thing that they're tasked with doing. So of course they are going to butcher and abuse the language of this incredibly vague legislation to serve whatever purposes, you know. It's so much easier to use vague language to make it align with your own racist agenda, you know, if the law is simply open for interpretation. It is open for interpretation, and this is a problem. I think we need to be thinking almost as if we are trying to be computer programmers, you know. We need to be thinking, what kind of language can we create for the U.S. legislation that even a computer could fucking execute the functions without much trouble, you know. We should not have laws that are open to interpretation, at least in such an extreme way. I think in some instances, depending on what the law is, it is good to make something a little open to interpretation or leave them purposefully vague, you know. This is something that also has utility and can be important, but this is something we should be really concerned with as we try to learn more about our legal system. Did I see the video of the CNN reporter getting arrested? Yes, I did. And what is the legality of that, you know? We need to understand this shit. It's so complicated, and it's really, I mean, it's frustrating. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about how complicated our legal system is. I think it's true that as time goes on, and also at baseline, you know, I think the language and the structure is intentionally complicated, and it becomes almost impossible for certain individuals to find much movement within our legal structure. This is definitely by design, you know. At the same time, I think that no matter what kinds of governments we come up with to govern, especially such a massive body of people, I think that it will necessarily be incredibly complicated too, you know. But where can we simplify? I feel like we need to simplify too. You know, and it doesn't help that basically each state is its own mini federal government as well. I mean, each state has its own 3 branches of government. And it's just like, if you look at it, it's almost like an infinite fucking flow chart. It just splits more and more up, more and more up. And it's interesting too because I hear a lot of people talk about almost the same way that we talk about violence. Certain people talk about violence as being implicitly good or bad. It's something to be avoided because it's violence and that's that, you know. I think that the same is true for conversations about centralization of power and decentralization of power, you know. People talk about decentralized power almost as this is the only way to govern, or the better, more ethical way to govern. But I'm not so sure that this is true either. I mean, the fact that power is so fractured, even though it all boils down to the most powerful figures, you know, but the fact that our legal system, the way it's set up and power distributions are so fractured, I mean, these are the things that really fuck people up on an individual level. Things like gerrymandering and drawing voting districts along certain lines to make sure that black populations don't get as much representation in their state legislature. Things like this, you know, this continuous fracturing of government. I mean, I think that people should also think about how more centralized efforts could also be a good thing. To think about things like tackling police brutality, you know. I think that it'd be useful to campaign at the state level for having states laws where police are stripped of their authority and immunity, and any policeman that kills on duty should have mandatory homicide charges, things like this. But at the state level, that'll only be good for the people who live in their respective states, you know. So maybe this is a thing that we should be trying to fight in the Supreme Court and trying to fight at a federal level as well, you know. I don't know. The strategies are endless. Like I said, there's never any one answer. There's always a multitude of answers. So we should be investigating each one if we want to find the best one, you know. And the best one will clearly be multifaceted. I imagine it will include violence. It will include lawsuits. It'll include so many things. So that's why it's our responsibility to be as educated as possible. I don't feel like I've really said anything of value, and I'm sorry for that. But I feel like this point is just the only point I'm really trying to make is the same point I was trying to make in the last upload, is that our number one priority should be becoming legal experts to the best of our abilities. For real. Oh my god, New Jersey Constitution Congress is happening and I'm late, says Mind Ranger. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, one of the projects we have in Phenomenology Club is called the New Jersey Project, where we're theorizing towards a philosophy of law that starts from nothing, you know. And even practices like this, I think, are really useful if you want to try to think about the U.S. legal system and how it's structured, you know. Try to think your best of what would the most perfect theoretical government be. And clearly, even an activity like this needs to be informed by other world histories and examining our politics and other politics. But honestly, like, sit down with a piece of paper and try to map out what you think a perfect government would be, and start to observe what kinds of problems you run into, because it really is an incredibly arduous task. And so that's why I say, on one level, I understand that complexity will probably be a necessary characteristic of any government, at least that governs such a huge body of people, but even smaller ones. I mean, even to think that your hypothetical society has only 500 people in it, even then, it's so difficult. Mary, I think we had an interesting discussion. It's an ongoing situation, so there aren't really strict answers right now. Thank you for another great stream. Yeah, Mary, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And like you said, I mean, there's no strict answers now, but there's never going to be any strict answers ever. No, nothing like this. There will never be a clear solution, you know. There's not really clear solutions, really, to most questions. I think that a lot of people feel as if there is only one truth, one true answer, one best answer to any question. But this is untrue when we think about things like hypothesizing into future possibilities. There will never be one concrete answer, no matter how much we look at history and what seems predictable. Especially when the future is a variable, when something is completely unknown, then there's no way to tell, We might look back I'm sure we'll look back in a few months and have much different opinions on what is happening right now than we do right now in the moment. Being in the moment too it's almost impossible to gain the adequate perspective that we need to actually observe what it is happening. So keep your minds open to all possibilities, and also, coming to definitive conclusions about what is right or wrong. There is no answer. There's only what seems the most right, what seems the most wrong, and try your best to navigate that. And you'll be better equipped to do this if you're constantly educating yourself in our politics, in all politics, and also in philosophy, because all governments have a philosophy. Our government has a philosophy. Our government is executed using philosophical interpretation, and the very language of our law is the thing that enforces the structure of law. Legislation is literally language, and language is a thing that is so open to corruption, especially the more vague that it is. But like I said, sometimes being intentionally vague also has utility. So I hope you're all consuming as much content as you can, not only of the news, which we have to be, mindful of at all times, but also please watch some videos on foundations of U.S. politics and world histories. And like I said, we're streaming some of these in the Phenomenology Club Discord if you would like to join. It's only $1. I haven't really been on social media, but if you find a way to contact me, in another way, I also make exceptions for people. I don't care about money. William, what about comparing local governing and or military service as a required role in life, like Korea or Israel? Well, I spoke about that a little, I think, in the last upload, but in my most hypothetical theory of government, the government of New Jersey, I think that it would be better to have a military that is constantly rotating, kind of like they do in South Korea, As soon as you turn 18, you serve 2 years and then you're out of there, I feel like the more rotational a thing like the military is, and also the more possibility that pretty much everyone in your personal life is going to have to do military duty at one point or another, I think that this would really change, for one, the attitudes of people in the military, the attitudes of citizenry toward the military, and also what people think the role of military should be, if any. World politics greatly influences all of this as well, I think a lot of, I won't even get into that, but yeah, I kind of feel this way about other jobs, not to get too New Jerseyan on you, but in my hypothetical New Jersey society, there would be lots of rotational work, things like, I would have to get into the whole theory of New Jersey. Basically, we have communal eating. We have disbanded the nuclear family for the most part. You eat in a cafeteria with your community. So we would have rotational jobs too, things like cafeteria service. I don't care if you're also an astrophysicist. This is something I would encourage you to do in your own time, but you will always be required to do things like community cleanup, community security, community cafeteria duty, because we eat in the cafeteria. You can't eat at home, okay? Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. I hope that this was at least motivational to try to get people to go educate yourselves. Please do it. It's so important. It is your responsibility. So go fucking do it. Go get to fucking reading right fucking now. I hope you're all safe out there, and I'll definitely be back soon and continue to try to offer thoughts as we continue with this. And again, also, if you need community, join our Discord server. We're not always just talking about New Jersey or learning US crash course politics, but we're also talking to each other, checking up on each other, sharing things with each other, and trying to foster a sense of community. So hopefully next time I see you guys, you have all read up on some things, and I would love to hear about what you learned. That's your homework assignment. Next time we meet, tell me something that you've learned and your theories for what exactly is happening right now as it relates to the U.S. legal structure. That is your homework. Go get to it. I'll talk to you all soon.